Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our practice edition where we talk about improvements we've done during the week and tie them back to lean principles. I am Uriel Eisen.
And I am Devin Bedoni.
And you have a quote?
We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Einstein via Toyota Kata.
Yeah. I think I like that one. I think like you have to sort of step back and be analyzing the whole system and sort of, instead of just like you're in the work, you make a mistake, there's an issue in production, like not giving yourself the time and the knowledge to kind of approach solving problems differently than just like daily production, I think is.
Yeah, and I think sort of the underlying focus is that you will never change your paradigm if you're unwilling to change how you think about things.
I like that. That's a good point.
Yeah. So if your goal is to be a company that does B, but you only think in terms of A, you'll never get there.
Right. Yeah. I guess that sort of harkens back to our last episode. If your focus is on production, you're much less likely to refine how you produce. And overall, you'll be less effective at goal A. So I have a little rant.
Yeah, rant away.
Henry Holsters, if you don't follow them on Instagram, it's worth a follow. Great. A lot of very interesting improvements.
Yeah.
Some very simple ones, some more complex ones, but generally way more on the simple side.
Yeah.
And simple here is not a criticism, and this is my rant. There is such a selection bias with social media, with just what gets people excited for improvements or just talking about big, exciting moves.
Yeah, shiny.
Yeah, and like the big problem with that is twofold. One, it means that the content out there that digs into specifics, like we just got into a conversation about how I press like Control C and Control V for copy and paste.
Yeah.
Like which fingers I'm using. And then Devin showed me like which ones you use. And I was like, oh, that's better than what I'm doing. And I'm going to try to change that. Like that is boring, but it's actually really critical. And like we spend most of our day doing these little things, but then no one's sharing how to improve how to do those little things.
Yeah.
And it could be how you're holding your wrists, how like your posture, your ergonomics of, oh, you lift it that way. That's funny. I do it this way. Wow. Your way is better. And this partly gets to why SOPs are so useful, but that's an aside. The second reason is because there's typically a lot more savings and much higher ROI on those really simple, quick, cheap improvements because they can shave a lot of time and they're cheap. And so it's just kind of
cheap in all ways, time and money generally.
Right. Yeah. Totally. And it's just a little vexing and problematic because I think it shifts the emphasis onto things that are really, it's a mistake and everyone's wasting, including myself. Like this is not, I'm not above this by any means, but like it's so easy to focus on the big, juicy, shiny things. And another piece of this, we've talked about this on the podcast, but I'll mention it again. When asked, most workers, like white collar, blue collar, every collar, will self-report that about 85% of their job is value add. When audited, it is typically flipped. It is typically 15% is value add and 85% is waste.
Yep.
The reason that's relevant is it is way, way, way better to go chase that 85% and shave that down. But in every task or operation, there is a tendency to focus on what you are trying to achieve rather than all the other stuff you need to do to achieve that thing. Sure. And this gets back into the, like if I am putting in screws, there is a very good chance that I'm going to be thinking about, oh, it would be great if I got a better drill. Like mine is a 12 volt drill. Battery technology has advanced so far. Let me get an 18 volt. It's so much torqueier. It's going to save me so much time. Maybe it will, but there's a very good chance that not putting in screws for 8 hours out of the 8-hour shift you're working, right? If you're like a general contractor, you are spending a ton of time on quoting, on invoicing, on like things that are not putting in that screw. Or even if you want to constrain it to just examining the process of a screw being installed,
Yeah.
if there's any time being spent finding the correct screw that you need to put in, right, and you're shuffling through your bins in the back of your truck, like that is probably a much cheaper place to shave time out of your operation of putting in your 7 screws than buying a new drill.
The auto screw guns? That
Like where it comes in on a ribbon?
Like chain fed?
Yeah.
So cool.
Amazing. Invented in World War I. No, the machine gun was invented in World War I. Anyway, so that's my rant. I think I really appreciate like people like Henry Holsters who share the simple things.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do that. The problem is, and this is not going to be solved, but it's just really being like worth being aware of. It gets a lot less engagement on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
It gets a lot less engagement on YouTube, but
it might make profit.
yeah, it's going to make a lot more money. Like, I don't know. The other incentive that's really interesting, and it's funny me saying this, but it's always interesting to me looking at who is posting on social media versus the people who don't have time because they're making money.
Right.
You know,
right.
Not that the goal is really making money. I mean, life, maybe.
It's a means to an end. Well, some people it's the whole end, but
yeah,
I think
for
for you and I, it's a means to an end.
Yeah. So, but it's interesting. Like I got into like microgreens, like growing microgreens.
Mm-hmm.
And I was finding all these videos on how microgreens were such a great business and like you can make hundreds of dollars. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, every person who says that pretty much, if you click around, they sell microgreen equipment. And I'm like, okay, I think the money is actually in convincing other people to buy microgreen equipment.
Classic pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
I guess if it works, it works.
I my guess is that a lot of them start off by growing microgreens and then it's like, oh yeah, you can make money, but
Just
it's hard
and
much. It's hard to go on vacation because if you miss a watering or your harvest time, your window is so critical, all these things. And then friends start being like, oh, where did you get that? And where did you get that? And it's like, and you slowly shift into selling equipment. And then,
yeah. There's so many pyramid schemes going around in my parents' friend group when I was a kid.
Oh, funny.
It was wild. Yeah. It's like, I'm exposing my hippie heritage here, but the blue-green algae craze, do you remember that?
No.
So there was all of these food products made with blue-green algae.
Okay.
And it was like straight unadulterated pyramid scheme. And
wow.
Yeah, so you'd like buy the stuff from the person and then you'd sell it to all your people. And it was just like lots of weird processed food with blue-green algae added.
That's very funny. So I guess the differentiator between a pyramid scheme and I forget what they call it.
Ponzi?
No, there's like the kosher version of a pyramid scheme where it's like peer to peer something or other sales.
You're right.
Is just whether your primary purchaser is the end consumer or if it's the people who are like joining.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's like if you're selling soap, do you end up with a bunch of people who sign up to sell soap with like 50 boxes of soap in the garage, or do you actually mostly sell soap?
Right.
And a lot of them, it's just like you convince people to also sell soap, but they can't actually sell soap. So they try to convince their friends to sell soap to try to make back the money that they have sitting in boxes of soap in their garage.
Yeah, I just was trying to find it on Google, and the first thing is, what is a pyramid scheme and why is it illegal?
Yeah.
Anywho, that was a severe tangent.
Yeah, should we hit some improvements?
Yeah. Also, we had some good feedback this last week.
Oh, yeah.
About, and I think we've sort of been coming to similar conclusions, how the 8 lean waste shouldn't be necessarily a rote, like, what was the phrase used? But like,
it's not like a Bible. Like we don't need to like refer back to the 8 lean waste to justify an improvement.
Exactly. And not everything should be measured against that.
Yeah. And the point they made, which I think is extremely valid, is that all of these things are really just tools to see waste.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, I mean, like this one, the 8 lean wastes, like teaching it or learning it or walking around the shop with keeping them in mind makes it easier to see things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also other frameworks that are also helpful.
Yeah.
And often it's helpful to switch frameworks from time to time to see more waste.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think really useful feedback. I think for me, like I was sort of thinking about this, I think the useful part to me about the 8 lean wastes in this podcast and sort of trying to like shoehorn each improvement back into like which 8 lean waste does it eliminate is it just gives us a bit of a framework, I think, to make sure that we discuss like more of the theory behind the improvement, because I think it's easy for us to fall into a bit of a pattern of just reading off the improvements we made this week, which honestly, like, unless you the listener, have the exact same problem, it's not very relatable or very interesting, probably. So it's more about tying things back to like the lean principles and like what problem we noticed. But even the specifics of the problem we noticed aren't actually interesting. Ideally, there's sort of some pattern recognition that can happen as the listener, where you go like, oh, I don't manage those files, but I do manage other files. Let me make that same improvement. Or like, I don't use a CNC mill, but I do use a table saw, and actually a lot of the things. So like I think it's been helpful for us a little bit just to build that habit of tying each improvement, discussing each improvement in like a more theoretical,
and I think it's
framework.
I found that there was a lot of things that I didn't see until I started to think in some of these terms. I think the one thing he said that was really good is that you don't need to categorize a given improvement against some, quote, 8 wastes line item budget, unquote, which I think is important to not, again, it's this constant challenge of not becoming dogmatic about any of this stuff and remembering the underlying purpose. Anyhow, that, and not to become myopically focused on the wastes to the exclusion of the larger picture.
Right.
So just a reminder.
Yeah. Like if you don't have product market fit in your business, getting wastes out of your processes is probably a waste of time.
Yeah. Or what was the great example?
Anyway, this is from Brian. So thank you, Brian, for writing in.
There's a great deal of random material stored in the middle of the shop, and people waste effort moving around it, which is something that might be hard to see. I don't know. This was a real example from a stove factory in Uganda, and he was just saying, like, you don't need Toyota level analysis to see that there's a big pile of stuff in the middle of your shop that needs to be moved.
Right. At the same time, it is helpful to walk around looking for particular things. Like, and each new thing is helpful to me in seeing more stuff. Yeah,
where a lot of I think maintaining balance is one way that the 8 wastes is helpful, because it's really easy to focus on one and like start to orient your shop, like optimize for one, and then to the expense of potentially others.
Yes, but there is the latest AME tour on YouTube, worth watching. It's AME Lean Tours or something like that.
Okay.
They were saying that in looking at their shop, it sounds like they're pretty metrics heavy. They make like big insulators for like power grid systems. That 85% of their waste, I don't know how they came up with this number or if they're right, was due to overproduction and waiting. And so they were like, we're just focusing on those two, and then we'll deal with the other ones later.
Interesting.
So anyway, I don't know. But every new set of metrics, I think, is a new lens to look at your production and reveals new things that you weren't sort of thinking of, like, which I mentioned last episode, the concept of expediting has become like something I just now cannot unsee.
Right.
Like anytime you go like, oh, let's change the order of these things, or oh, why don't you do that first and then I'll do this thing later in the day. Mm-hmm. Like that is all indicating a problem. And so like we've started seeing new levels of problems that we weren't really aware of.
Yeah.
Could you shoehorn that concept into the alien waste? Probably. Is there any point to that? Probably not. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is an interesting mental exercise, and I think will lead to a deeper understanding of the thing. Yeah. Similarly, like theory of constraints, Eliyahu Goldratt, he has a different thing that he looks for, namely like inventory ahead of a bottleneck, and that's what he's hunting for, and that is also a useful lens.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's do some improvements.
Tangent. You want to lead us off here?
All right, sure. So this is a funny one. I trimmed the trees along the highway because I realized like
you may need to explain where your shop is and
that
its relation to the highway.
There is a 2-lane highway with shoulders. Me and my employee bike to work on the shoulder, and so it was like if there's ever an incident, like this is not safe because you have to potentially swerve into traffic or like brush through like low-hanging branches.
Yeah.
And so that would throw a major wrench in production to crash
for quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, so it was just funny because I know Toyota talks, or a lot of these books talk about like how far improvements can sort of extend outside of the shop. Mm-hmm. Or like there was an example of Knudsen, who was
the drink company.
The guy who sort of set up. I mean, there are a lot of other people involved. The production of war stuff for World War II. Uh-huh. I think his name was Henry Knudsen. Is that right? Anyway, no, that's not right. Anyway, Knudsen, Freedom's Forge, great book.
Yeah.
An example of him touring factories, trying to figure out how to get enough stuff made for World War II, and pointing out a leak, like an oil leak on one of their workers' cars, and the guy was like, why are we looking at in the parking lot? And he was like, well, we need the people here. Uh-huh. Like there was an issue where the U.S. government decided to like hold all rubber from U.S. supply to only ship overseas, and Knudsen was kind of like, people won't show up to work. Like they need tires on their cars. How are we doing that?
Yeah.
Anyway, so we trimmed I just stopped and I was a little late to work, and it was, my improvement was a few branches were blocking the shoulder, and so I cut them.
Nice. I like it. Quorum. So this is something we were talking about for a while, kind of on our ongoing tool management journey.
Yep.
We set up our standard versus non-standard thing, and the non-standard tools, when we pull them out of a machine, have ended up just kind of on a bench.
Okay.
Loose. Yeah. And they're in the way. So we'd been talking about it for a while, but Quorum finally designed and printed a caddy and made it in yellow, so it matches the color of our non-standard tags or whatever.
Very nice.
So it's kind of just like tools go here, and those holders are free for the taking if you need a holder for something.
Gotcha. Like you can disassemble this tool.
Yeah, basically.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What if it's a tool that has like 1/4 inch end mill in a holder? Mm-hmm. The standard version is like with 1 inch of stick out, and right now it's set up with 1 1/4. Is that still free for the taking, or how do you handle that?
Well, so we have a system that we came up with, but we haven't really been using it yet. That is still a standard.
Gotcha. It's like modified.
But a modified standard.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's actually a good reminder. We need to come back to getting more, like, what's the word?
Like following that process?
Yeah, just following that process properly.
Yeah. And it's so hard.
Yeah. Also, like, if it's not an issue, it's not an issue. Right
Yep.
now, it's not an issue. So maybe it's just not a thing.
There's that too.
Yeah.
His name is William Knudsen, or Big Bill Knudsen.
Big Bill.
Big Bill. He was big. And his name was Bill. Problem I've sort of been noticing trying to release new products. It is a core function of our business, though that may come as a surprise to some of you listeners. No, so we do want to release a lot more product. We learned a lot from the release of our previous product, the 3/4 inch pin ladder lock. And now we're working on a couple new ones that should be coming out soon. But I wrote out a list of all of the departments, or like all the tools in the shop, and started sort of writing out how the new product affects each of them. And it was
interesting.
Very helpful. I think we're going to we sort of started writing out this list of like all the things that need to be considered to release a new product.
Yeah.
Inspired by, this may come as a surprise, Toyota. Writing sort of guides for how to do different things, but maintaining, it's not meant to be a recipe. It's not like, to avoid squeaking in a car, do this. It's more like, consider squeaking. Here are some of the things we've learned.
Interesting. So this is actually a product design, or this is a shop effects, or it's both?
This is a how to release a new product in our shop.
Okay.
So ideally we can release new product with less rework, I think is going to be the major thing, and less chaos and confusion across the shop when it actually hits.
Yeah. Because
I think it can be very reactive. Like we went through we basically walked around the shop and went, how will this affect here? Like one of the ones we're working on doesn't have racking holes. So suddenly in the paint department, we don't have a way to rack them. So it's like, we need to develop new racks.
Right.
Probably before we launch this product.
So it's product design criteria, but it's also like production implications.
Yeah, I wouldn't even use the word criteria. It's more like starting to build let's say I hire another product designer. It would be a huge waste if I couldn't just hand them a document that is like, hey, here are all the things we've learned from releasing the past product.
Yeah.
And so ideally we start codifying all this information and the learning as we learn along the way, so that anyone ideally should be able to read this book and design a product that works well, from how webbing is, like how we develop friction, thinking through like the release angle, the like how well it accommodates various thicknesses of webbing, and like just things that are easy to forget to consider until later in the process, and then you have to revisit things.
Yeah.
And that is all waste.
Interesting.
And it's just slow and frustrating because you're like, oh fuck, I forgot to consider that aspect, and now we're doing rework. So anyway, so just started doing that. So pretty excited about just having that list, I think is going to be big.
Yeah. Cool. Well, after my complaints last episode about not being able to run parts on the gripper, we did run more parts on the gripper this week.
Excellent.
So one of the improvements was a small one, but just updating our universal macro to run on the new tray. Pretty straightforward.
So what was the problem you noticed?
The problem was our universal macro wouldn't run on the new tray because all of the layout was different and dimensions were different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The problem is we couldn't use it, so we had to be able to use it.
Nice.
Yeah. Relatively straightforward. And I was kind of gearing myself up for some like surprises and gotchas, and thankfully there were none, and it just ran, which was
Isn't that hilarious?
Pretty cool.
Watching the automation, it looks complicated. It's so simple. So after we've been talking a bit about how to structure all those macros and file management questions and this and that. So after that conversation, I just implemented a new product on the gripper, and I was painfully aware of all of the editing I had to do after our conversation. I think before that, I was just like relieved that I didn't have to, like, it's just so much better than the previous methods.
Right. You're just relieved.
So it's like, wow, this automation is awesome. All I have to do is all this. And this time I was sort of like, I have to do all of this.
Yeah.
Including, which we talked about, and I sort of wrote it off as like not a big deal at all, changing all of the program numbers inside the macro.
The sub-program calls.
Yeah, and it's like, if you mess that up, it's really bad.
It's high consequences.
High consequence, very fiddly, and completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
So
you're on my team? Is that what you're saying?
100%. Yeah, and I would love to discuss further. Because, I think there's like, I don't know. I feel like it took me 2 hours before I was like, yes, this just runs. Mm-hmm. And you're changing like X, Y coordinates. Like that, it just feels like stuff you should be able to probe for or whatever. Like I almost wanted to write like a routine for probing that you run first.
Yep.
The first time, and that updates all of the things you need.
Mm-hmm. I've put some thought into that. It's a little complicated, but it's definitely doable.
Well, I was just going to ask, is there any, probably not, this would be a bad idea. Is there any way to rewrite your G-code program from code? Like, I know you can rewrite a macro variable, but I don't think you can save it back to the program.
Wait, sorry. Oh.
Right?
Well, you'd have to make the program have a variable.
Right, but then if the next program you used the same variable, it would overwrite it.
Yes.
So I'm trying to store it.
What variable are you trying to store?
Like the XY, or say the Z position on a stock size.
Yeah.
And then you want to keep that with part A, always stored in part A, because next time you run it, you're gonna use the same stock. Mm-hmm. But then when you run part B,
well, if you probe each time, it would just.
No, but the point is you wouldn't. You would just probe it as the setup. It would like record all these coordinates. It would write it into the program, and then every time you used it in the future. Anyway. Yes.
Yeah.
Those macros are a hassle.
Long story short, we need to simplify the macros.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Nice. We added... we have our spray or like, Windex and whatever in one place in the shop. And I was always walking across the shop to get a paper towel.
Yeah.
And so we put a paper towel holder, on the same shelf.
Yeah.
So now, cause normally you like find something you want to clean and then you walk over to get the cleaner. And so it just made sense to walk over, get the cleaner and a paper towel, and then walk back, do the cleaning, and then put the thing away. I think in a small shop, it's easy to forget about walking across the shop being a waste.
Yep.
Like it makes sense if it's like building to building or like, it's a 10-minute walk to the next department. But it's like there's like an efficient kitchen. It's meant to be like you look at the triangle between the sink, the stove, and the fridge. And the smaller that triangle is, the better. Yeah. And I think it's not a triangle in a shop, but probably activity by activity, you could sort of start to think about that. And it does add up. Yeah. In fact, in our shop, it's like at least a penny per step. Which adds up. Like that sounds like not a lot, but actually, if you start counting that up, you have a decent budget for fixing these problems.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about how my feet feel at the end of a day, and I was like, that's expensive.
Yeah, that too.
That kind of leads into this. I don't know if this counts as an improvement, but a lot of improvements will flow from it. We signed a lease on a new space.
Wow.
Last week.
That's huge.
Yeah. It is huge. All kinds of
huge.
All kinds of the everything. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about layout, which is part of the reason I haven't been making actual improvements in our current shop. But yeah, that kind of like, it's interesting trying to break down material flows, information flows, and people flow, and trying to do a layout that accommodates all of it effectively. Okay. And sort of like figuring out what your commonalities are, where things can be in a way that information and material and people can kind of move as one.
Gotcha.
I don't have a good answer yet, but
yeah,
been spending a lot of time thinking about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that'll be interesting to have the freedom to kind of start from scratch, knowing what you know now from the last place, but also it seems like such a big leap.
Yeah.
And such a shift that you might just make a whole new set of mistakes.
It's very possible. And in my head, I keep finding myself like, I'll like start doing a layout in my head and then realize that I've laid everything out in like a quarter of the new shop.
Hilarious. I mean, that's probably good.
Well, it's the size of my current shop.
But I'm saying in high school, we got a big shop.
Yeah.
At one point. Then it flooded. But we set up when we moved in, it was like, wow, there's so much space. So we had like a whole hardware area and a tool area and then this area. And then it was like, oh, I forgot a box of screws. And then you'd literally get back like 4 minutes later or 5 minutes later. And you're like, so then we totally redid it and like tried to make it as small as possible. Yeah. It's like, just because you have the space doesn't mean it's cost effective to use it.
No, I'm not planning to like try and sprawl too much.
No.
It's more like, how do we make this effective, but also able to accommodate expansion in the future easily while maintaining good flow now. Anyway, it's exciting and terrifying, and
that'll be very,
it's gonna be cool,
interesting. Congrats. I know you've been looking for a while. Big move. I guess literally and metaphorically. So Sam improved the assembly area of our shop. I think we've talked about this before, but just the lack of space. It's not really the issue. I mean, it's easy to say the lack of space. I think this gets into the A3 question. Like, we started doing an A3, and it's like, we don't care about space. We care about sufficient space to do the activities we need to do.
Effective space,
and actually more space makes it less effective directly in some ways, like how far you need to reach to get the parts you want. There's a lot of questions around this, but the latest improvement is just to accommodate some of these new products we're working on, because the last product launch we forgot to consider new inventory space at our assembly area, which definitely heightens the awareness of some of the issues associated with inventory, even though our product is so small. I was like, kind of think about, like, in that example email, a stove company. We make buckles that are like 1 inch by 1 inch.
Right.
If we were making stoves, this would be like so consequential.
Yeah.
It is still consequential, but not nearly as.
Yeah.
So that was good. Just preemptively kind of figuring out how much space we need, making that space, getting stuff out of there that we don't need. I'll tie another. We got a keyboard drawer to go under the desk.
Classic.
So that because we don't actually use the keyboard very much. It's more like a reference computer there, and it runs our laser. But like, it's more so it's intermittent use.
Question for you.
Yeah,
you started using the fast cap, like quick pipe or something to
rapid
pipe to build benches and desks. Has it been good? Yes and
we're using I'm forgetting the name, Maker Pipe.
Okay.
The reason we went with Maker Pipe over Fast Cap was that they offered, and Fast Cap may have launched this, but they offer fittings for 3/4 inch conduit rather than 1 inch. I did a quick calculation of some of the projects we wanted to do, and the added cost of 1 inch conduit is pretty substantial. And I just didn't feel like we actually needed the strength of 1 inch conduit for a lot of the stuff we did. And really the goal for me was to have a universal building method. It's probably not universal,
sure,
but enough so that trying new things wasn't really a consideration. Wasn't like, when you like, oh, do I really want to cut up like a sheet of plywood? And the conduit, the 3/4 inch conduit, I think 10 feet is like $8 instead of like 12 or 16 or something. So it just felt like we'd be more. So the plan is to sort of have a lot of these fittings, have a lot of the conduit and then just freely sort of cut it down. And then if we disassemble stuff because we change the design or something, we just will have some scrap storage areas in different lengths.
Yeah.
And so it's not just like, wasting is a bummer. I don't know, from a few angles. So,
Right.
so the goal was to sort of lower the friction to trying new fixtures and like put a lamp up over the bench, put a tool tray over here. It hasn't hit that point for me where it's like so easy, we just do it.
Right.
And I was hoping it would. And I think we need to get a little bit better at just cutting stuff and just trying stuff.
Do you have like a portaband that you keep handy for like chopping it down, or how are you handling that?
Right now we put it on our bandsaw, which is a bit of a hassle, but that's not, I think, actually this would be an interesting like A3 to do. But I'm thinking about it now, like what is the obstacle that's keeping us from just using it? I would say is like we don't have enough like flanges or like ways of attaching it to things. Like getting from like the plywood wall to conduit. Right now it's like, I don't know how I'm going to mount that. I think maybe is probably one obstacle. And then the other is just like, it's still a project.
Yeah.
It's not as long of a project, but yeah, I like it. It's like rigid enough to be useful. Everything. I do like it.
Cool. In the context of a new space, I'm definitely gearing up to make a bunch more little workstations and stuff to better utilize some of we have a lot of like overlapping processes in workstations right now.
Right.
That is not ideal.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be like, we need a computer here that's just for this.
Yeah.
Where you're not having to move a bunch of stuff out of the way to do whatever it is you need to do. So I was thinking about going that direction.
I think it's a good direction to go for a few reasons. Like I calculated it. I had Sam built a workstation recently out of it. I'm guessing with his time, and it was his first time using it, so he'll get faster, but it was probably around $120.
That's not bad at all.
It's not bad at all. You can buy a table for around that, but we are building skills in the shop at the same time.
And it might not be a table you want.
Exactly what we want.
Yeah.
And I think the bigger part, which is another barrier to using it more, is the more stuff is made out of it, the easier it is to then add stuff to it, because it like we can clamp to the
Right.
And so that would be another reason to use it.
Interesting.
Like if all of our shelves were made out of it and we just had like bars on the walls for like storing things, and like it would be so easy. It's like, oh, I want a lamp. Okay, I'm adding a lamp using that, all the same hardware.
Yeah.
We're going to build a little photo area for product photography, and I'm going to do it out of that. And then it'll be easy to add lights to and different things. So
cool. We need to wrap up here, but a question to the listenership. One thing I'm planning to do is to have a a vertically stacked but horizontally laying stock rack for our incoming material.
Meaning bars are laying down.
Bars are laying down, but on like arms coming out of our rack. If anybody has experience with existing products that they like, or design for a product, or design for a system that they have found to be useful, please reach out. My scheme right now is that everything comes in for a job, gets tagged, goes on this rack, and then afterwards goes onto a separate rack that's just for offcuts and extra inventory material, so that we're not overlapping the two.
Oh, nice. Smart.
So it's easy to parse and figure out what's what.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anyhow, that's all I got for today.
Same.
Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next week. You can find me at Lycan_MFG on Instagram.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing, also on Instagram, and the podcast at incremental CI on Instagram. Love hearing from y'all, and till next week.
Adios.